Next, it talks about internal validation, and that basically is how do you get buy-in from other stakeholders? How do you have supporting data to agree with the problem that you think is there? Research, talking to customers. Like I said, a lot of times I see designers start with a design, but until you identify the problem, and then you realize that this is a problem for someone besides you, it really doesn't make sense for you to waste cycles on designing something yet, because it's not likely to get built if you don't have these two things accomplished. Next, once you prototype, and this is where I talked about where you showed it to customers and it was 44% more likely. These three phases, if you do these three phases and then show it to a CEO or a VP of product or someone else, this is your ammunition for getting it done. And they're much more likely to say, when can we get started versus is this going to work? After this is normally where a product manager would take more ownership in the development and refinement, and then live testing and optimization, and then ultimately the full launch. These are just the phases of the confidence curve. As you can see, you start off with 0%, but as you get to internal validation, you tell other people they agree with you, you research it, you talk to customers, you prototype it, you see your confidence is going up. And as you get further and further along, the likelihood of your success is going to be a lot higher. When you have varied team alignments, multiple stakeholders, lack of executive directive, nobody is basically saying, let's go do this. This is a problem that you identified yourselves. Or you're in a medium to large company like I was at Amazon and Alibaba. What happens a lot of time is organizational paralysis. So if you see a problem and you're at a big company, you're just a cog in a wheel, it's very hard to get everyone else motivated to get this started. When that happens, the confidence curve is a great product to use because you basically have everything within your hands in terms of identifying a problem, talking to customers, which I think most people here have access to, building a prototype and sort of getting that early validation before you talk to some executive and pitch them on your idea. So the problem. So when you find a problem, number one, it has to be quantifiable. It has to solve a critical business issue, and it has to be a KPI that the company monitors. So what's a problem that may not be that, right? Like if the copy is not intuitive, or if the color schemes may not work, those are problems. But if that copy is not leading to a lower conversion rate, then that's not something you should focus on. If you see that the bounce rate on that page is really high, then that gives you a reason to say, hey, the bounce rate on this page is really high because the copy's off, let's think about changing it. So when you think about your problem, it has to be quantifiable and it has to be a KPI that people actually care about. So internal validation. Internal validation, the type of data I like to use is a lot of customer behavior data. So like I said, my background is in gaming and commerce. So commerce is all about conversion funnels. How many people add to cart? How many people do a page view? How many people actually transact on something? So that data is also great because that's the sort of language that business and executive leadership think about when they're considering, what to work on. So if you're using that sort of information, that's going to be important. The second piece, like I said before, is super important to gain support from somebody outside of your organization, and that's especially true if you're not the decision makers within your organization. So that could be your product person, that could be engineering, but and the more senior, the better. Like you have to, if you can't get someone interested in your problem, then that probably means it's never going to get built. So like one word of wisdom is if your problem isn't based on somebody's bonus, it probably will never happen because people only care about themselves. So if it's not tied to somebody's bonus or salary, then it's not likely to get made. So customer research. So This is where I think a lot of times designers thrive, especially UX designers. So once you get the quantified data, then you supplement that with the qualitative understanding. So like again, we can go back to the example of copy. You saw that there was a high bounce rate on a certain page on the funnel. Now you talk to customers who bounce at that point to understand why that's happening. So interviews, surveys, I normally like to do interviews first, and then once I have an idea of the problem, then I will move to a survey. And the more and the better you can quantify qualitative information, the better off you're always going to be. So if you can say, you know, I'm actually, like I said, at Vivint right now, we're building a commerce experience. We don't have that experience built. So I'm using user testing, and we're doing that with 30 people. You know, 15 will get the prototype that we're designing, 15 will get the existing piece, and then I can ask them to do a couple of tasks, time how long it takes them, ask them what their experience is like, and hopefully the experience I'm building is better, and I can say, hey, people accomplish this task 35% faster, and we're 44% more happier with their experience. When I talk to our CEO, Todd, about that, he's going to relate to that. He's going, oh, people are getting it done faster and they're more happy. Wow, that's great, right? And even though it's only 30 people, when you quantify qualitative information like that, it's much easier to be digestible by executives. Last phase is prototyping. So this is where, you know, designers also like to thrive, where, you know, you basically, you identified a problem, you got validation from other stakeholders, you talk to them, now you're actually designing a solution for them. And like I said, surveys are great for that. And after you get to this step, it's also a great time to go talk to someone else. And that's because you can do all these things on your own, right? Pretty much. You can do you can talk to customers. Most people have access to the data. You can interview somebody. You can build a prototype. So I like the confidence curve for designers because at this point you can do it yourself. Now, when it comes to development, you need help, right? When it comes to marketing, you need help. But you could actually make the case for whatever you want to get done all on your own. And then if you talk to a product person or a VP at a company and you've already done this legwork and it all looks impressive, like you're more than likely to get the okay for it. The problem here was we had a very low app rating. It was like 2.5 stars, which is awful, terrible. And we had a large number of customer contacts. So Audible is a subscription business. A person would see an ad, and then they would say, oh, you say you're going to give me a free book? I download the iOS app, and I don't get the book. And then these were just some of the customer contacts that I loved and that our CEO would tell me, read to me. He would say, Yohanes, why bother creating an app from which you can neither view your wish list nor purchase this? It's stupid. You're fired. So I didn't like hearing that. He would email these to me. It's so hard to figure out how to add books. On the Amazon and Audible app, I can't buy a Kindle version or audio version of a book, but I can buy a paper version. How does this make any sense? Fix this. I can't buy an audiobook on this application. It's a shame. Quickly update. So this was like my biggest issue. This was a huge problem. I couldn't change the Amazon side because Amazon's not going to move for little old me or Audible, but I had to find a solution for it. Because this was such an important experiment and because it was so expensive, I had to define benchmarks for what success would look like because it was costing us, so much money on a daily basis. Our CFO and everyone was looking at these metrics on a daily basis to determine if we should turn this off or if we could let this go on. So, and this is important. You could talk to your product manager, or if you guys are doing that part yourselves, for defining what your benchmarks are for any projects that you work on. So average amount listened. And I basically broke our benchmarks down into two groups. One were our business metrics, the other were our customer metrics. because both groups had to be happy. Average amount listened, average number of sessions. This is another customer metric. Percent book completion. This is based off percent book completion would determine how much or what percentage of people will churn and never come back, and what percentage would ultimately sign up for a subscription. And the last one was our business metric of what percentage actually signed up for a monthly subscription, which is the revenue piece. So our CFO was freaking out at this point because we're spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars over the course of days. And on the first day of every cohort, the control group would do better. But in terms of listening and number of sessions, we were blowing it out the water. So this is why it's important to have your benchmarks, because if we didn't have our benchmarks, then they would see that more people are signing up for the control group, turn this thing off. But because we had benchmarks that were both business metrics and customer metrics, then people felt pretty good about how much they were listening and how many sessions they were having. So we were able to keep the experiment on longer.
Yeah, in the internal validation, you talked about getting the metrics and showing changes. How do you go about actually quantifying that before you identify kind of a path or a solution or gotten them into design? Like, what are you using to determine the delta?
Yeah, so at least for this example, which I basically did myself, I looked at it was much easier for this because we had Android, right? So on Android you could do that. We could say everything we wanted to say, and we had an experience where we thought this should be our benchmark. We say, here's the conversion rate on Android, here's it on iOS. The difference is the opportunity we have for improving it. You might not always have that. And then, like at Vivint, we don't have that, right? At Vivint, they do all their sales historically through door-to-door, and you have to call a phone number, which is crazy in 2019 to sign up for a subscription. So what I do for Vivint is I look at industry standards for benchmarks. So there's industry standards for cost per acquisition by industry. There's industry standards for page views, add to carts. The entire funnel, you could always use industry standards.